Welcome, everybody. I'm going to give us just a couple of minutes because I know we are expecting more people just to allow them to join, but um, I don't want to lose our time with our panelists to have this conversation today. Um, I am, I think I've had the privilege of meeting most of you, but I'm Marian Patterson, the alumni director here at Walkers, and I am so thrilled that we have three alums and one faculty member who are going to speak today on a topic that I am not qualified at all to speak about. I only bring people together in this Zoom room. Um, it's ironic. We were just trying to speculate on why they are all three based in the UK, whether that has anything to do with what's going on. But it's wonderful to have Leah Anathan, Fiona DeKirkhoff, and Emily Sappington joining us. And our moderator is going to be Maureen Lamb, who is I'm going to try to get your whole title right, Maureen, but she's the Dean of Faculty and the Dean of Educational Technology and Innovative Pedagogy. Did I get that right?
You did. Thank you, Marian.
Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to you, and we're going to have time at the end for audience questions, but you can also write things into the chat as we go if they're on your mind, and Maureen will be monitoring that for the end. Take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much for putting this together, Marian. This is very exciting. So we're going to get going here, but I'd like to give all of our panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves. And as Marian said, I am delighted to be the Dean of Faculty, the Dean of Academic Technology and Innovative Pedagogy, and the Latin teacher here at Ethel Walker. And we've been doing some things with AI around here. I've been doing some conferences, some research, and I like to call myself an AI enthusiast because I like to play around and see what it can do for teachers and students. And so let's give our wonderful alumni panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves. Leah, would you like to introduce yourself?
I would. I'm worried that Mira and my father are on, and it feels like a parent-teacher conference. I hope I'm not in trouble. It's lovely to be a part of this. So thank you so much for the invitation. My name is Leah. I'm in the class. I'm a representative of the class of 1992. My day job is I'm chief marketing officer of a software company called Muse. I am London-based. Muse is founded in the Czech Republic and is a Dutch and European company that's spreading around the world. And it's a relatively young company, but growing quickly. And I'm responsible for their global marketing program, which includes all things B2B marketing.
Great. Thank you so much. Emily, will you please introduce yourself?
Hi, folks. Yes, nice to see many familiar faces on here. I'm Emily Sappington. My role currently is Senior Director of Product Management for a company called Genesis. We've been around since the 1990s, focused on communication technology. So we are the way that you call Amex or HSBC or Airbnb when you message and email your hosts. We provide that technology, and I've really for over 10 years been working in artificial intelligence on the design side, the creative side. So that's how we speak to computers. And now at this stage of my career, how we speak to and through computers to reach humans as well. So looking forward to this topic.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And last but certainly not least, Fiona, will you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Maureen. First of all, I'm super excited to see Marcia Davis on here. So fellow alum from the class of 89. I live in the UK, but I'm American and Australian, so a bit of a combo there. I'm an attorney for a German software company called SAP. It's one of the largest business software providers in the world. And I support one of our products called Business Technology Platform. But in addition to that, I'm on our AI governance team. It's a team of about 18 lawyers. We have over 420 lawyers at SAP, so it's kind of a cool team to be part of. And I've been with SAP for about 8 years, and I think like Emily, I think it's exciting to work in the area of AI. and I'd love to talk to you more about what you've been doing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So the way this is going to work is we are going to ask a series of questions to our panelists, and each of the panelists will have an opportunity to answer those questions. If you have questions as we go through the different questions for panelists, please feel free to put your questions in the chat so you don't forget it, but we are going to get to those questions at the end of this session. So, all right, let's get started. So the first question is the up and coming use of AI something that's positive, negative, or both? And what do you perceive to be some of the dangers associated with AI? Leah, do you want to start?
Sure, I can. I think for Fiona and Emily, who are living and breathing this every day, it's just almost probably at the point of business as usual. I think for a lot of people who are discovering AI technologies, I would say it sort of reminds me in terms of the technology going mainstream of a time period when social media was just sort of coming into our lives. And if you think back to like the years between 2004 and 2006, we had Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube all start to go and reach huge numbers of millions and millions of people all at once. And I think at that time, if you look back at first uses of Facebook, first uses of Twitter, first uses of YouTube, you knew it was something, but you didn't quite know exactly how it was going to change your daily life. And today, we get all of our news, all of our connections with family and friends, how we consume media. These things have changed dramatically in the past decades. And I think we're at that similar stage with AI in terms of mainstream use and how we incorporate it into our lives. I think it's going to be incredibly powerful. And Emily and Fiona can give a preview into the future. But in terms of what stage of adoption it is for most people, all businesses right now are grappling though with how do you adopt it and as quickly as possible so that you de-risk what AI could do to your organization, to your products, and to your roadmap. Investors in my company have had this as a board level issue. And just for context, Muse develops software that runs hotels. So probably many of you have interacted with the software that we use. And we look at it across the board as an opportunity. It's a huge opportunity, but it does come with risks. And I'm sure Fiona can speak quite at length about them. I look at it and I'd say, the risks that you see is, AI taking control of your own privacy, your own images, your own likeness, your own voice, all of these kinds of things are an area that we have to pay a lot of attention to. And I do think that it's an area that needs to get regulated. But for now, we're in that nice early stage of just pure discovery, and it's just mostly very exciting.
Awesome. Thank you. Emily, will you please share?
Yeah, happy to jump in. Leah, you're exactly right. Like this is the Wild West that we're in right now when it comes to AI. The thing I always like to underscore though, when it comes to the potential where we could be going with it, is that AI is a tool, not the destination. At least that's my personal feeling on it, is that we should be enabling students, enabling workers to use it to their advantage and be appropriately skeptical of what comes out of different machine learning algorithms, but to teach them to use it and not just expect that they're finished when it's finished, because like any tool, it's in its infancy right now. I think it's also important to know the question was kind of around what is this future like? Is it scary? And we joked in the notes before about, is it Skynet? And so anybody that knows Terminator knows that's a lot of folks that don't work in tech. That's the first thing they'll think of. And candidly, yes, what Boston Dynamics is doing is exciting and a little frightening, but I have faith that the teams working on those things are invested in human override capabilities. The ability to have a human in the loop is something we talk about a lot when working in AI, to intervene, to make sure that we control what it's doing. I think what's more important than those working in the industry is those that will be consuming things made by artificial intelligence. We're entering a time where, unfortunately, those who will have a disadvantage are going to be those who don't understand how to be critical of AI, how to spot, is this real? Can I trust it? Should I be skeptical of this source? That for me is a greater concern than humanoid robots any moment. I think we're already facing that challenge when it comes to misinformation already. So for me, that's the thing that is the most urgent concern. Whereas I do believe those making it are being mindful of, we're not going to flip the switch and have every car be driverless. We're going to make sure people can intervene and grab the wheel when they need.
Yeah, I think
Great.
yeah, I was just going to jump in there because I think what Emily's talking about and what I was going to focus on this question is about hallucinations. And that's where AI can, when it doesn't have an answer for something, it can make up an answer. And there was a prime example of this when a lawyer submitted a brief to a court. And in the brief, you normally cite other cases that have been decided, so that you can prove up your evidence that way. And what happened is the lawyer had obviously drafted this brief using ChatGPT or something like that, and ChatGPT just made up cases, and the court was really, upset with that lawyer and fined the lawyer for this, and that's a clear case of where, what we find at SAP is businesses are wanting to incorporate AI into everything, but they have to think about the fact that these models are spitting out something. You don't know, like Emily was saying, how reliable what they're spitting out is. So you've got to intervene as a person and look at whatever you're using as an AI tool. Always double check what you're getting out of it. You just can't trust it. I think it's a good jumping off base. It can create a lot of shortcuts for things, but it's not the end point,
And I'll just, so we have a positive note, if you don't mind, Maureen, I'll add one more thing is that, a jumping off point, living here in Europe, I manage folks from all over the world for whom English is their second or third language, and encourage them to use ChatGPT to formulate a start. And then we'll work through, they know what technically the document needs to say, but they want to know how to say it in a vernacular that Americans and Western countries will understand. So it can be a helpful tool, but exactly as everybody said, let's not stop there. Let's be skeptical.
Absolutely. That's a really good point. The next thing we want to talk about are what are some privacy considerations to think about when you're using AI in businesses or elsewhere if you're using it for personal reasons. Let's see.
I feel like on the privacy, that Fiona, you should start and I will follow because this is right up your alley.
Yeah, I think, and I'm just going to be brief here and say that, so far what we say about privacy, at least in Europe, and that's where I think we have the strongest privacy laws are. And so how we're treating AI is just as similar as we would treat anything under privacy law here. And that is that there are categories of privacy that you look at. You look at personal data, which is anything that would make you identifiable. So like maybe your license plate number, you might be able to track somebody with their license plate number, and if you know that they live like me in the UK, right? And then there's personally identifiable information, PII. So that's going one step closer or more sensitive, like your date of birth, your social security number, your passport number, really clearly fingerprints, really clearly linked to who you are. Okay, so those things are protected under something called the GDPR in the EU. And a lot of countries have adopted similar types of laws and regulations. And so when I use AI, what I think about is, well, would I just put in my passport number or my fingerprints or something like that into a tool that I don't know anything about, that I have no control over where that information is going? And the answer is no, absolutely not. Because right now, you don't know who's on the back end of that AI tool. It could be Microsoft, but it could be a company you've never heard of before. And you don't know how well they're protecting that sensitive information. So I would just say that that's where I would, from a legal standpoint, that's where I would come from. And I would want to protect my PII the best I can.
I mean, I have no hesitation in using, AI for search, and especially with different companies that I know and I trust. So I'll use a couple of examples. Like, there's just easy use cases out there right now. LinkedIn has their own search that they're trying to power to help you find smarter job selections. I trust them with my job information. I trust them with that search. I trust them with the results they would provide. Booking.com, if you use them for travel, they're playing with an AI powered trip planner. It's not amazing yet, but it's going to get to a point, and this is something that we look at carefully in travel. It takes a lot of searches to put together a really good itinerary based on your preferences, your budget, where you're trying to go, what holiday you're celebrating. A lot of these searches can be shortened up. So there's a lot that's out there in terms of opportunity. And while it's on the privacy side, it's probably no more than, if you think of how much you share with Google today in terms of what you're willing to search for on Google, if you trust them, they're going to serve up smarter and smarter results. And I think it's just a case of figuring out what is it that you're willing to give in terms of your data in order to find what you're looking for, and how responsible are the organizations that you're working with. We're starting to test using, companies have to think about it from a privacy standpoint of our own data and our own customers' data. And we're starting to use it in ways because Microsoft has embedded OpenAI into their own proprietary search, and that's closed off with our customer data. And now we can use it in a very extensive way, and feeling like with confidence that our own customer data is going to be highly protected. There are things that can be done, but you just have to think carefully about the context of what you're searching, how you're sharing, and how you're using these models. And so I think, it's as both Fiona and Emily keep saying, like, you go carefully, and you go with intention into this world, knowing that it's coming at you anyway, because everybody you work with, all the companies that you work with, all of the professionals that you work with are in that discovery phase with AI.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think the advantages are great, right? Our personalizations, everything, our time to complete tasks will speed up because of this, because they will know what I always buy at the grocery store and the trip I take every year to Cape Cod. Sorry, my cat's getting into something. They'll be aware of that. But on the other hand, the downside of this is what happens if that data gets out in any way. For example, healthcare purposes, it's amazing to be able to have anonymized healthcare data to run AI models over and look for early detection signs that a human eye might not pick up. And that's great. But the keyword there is anonymized. Imagine if, was it Lloyd Austin, our Secretary of Defense in the US, if that individual person's healthcare records get out, that could be bad for national security. So you can see how, while it might not matter one individual random person, data sovereignty is very important at a large scale for individuals, but also just overall to make sure that everyone's information is safe, whether it's massively a problem for security or whether it's just an individual.
Yeah. And I think you're bringing up a good point there, Emily, and that is, we don't know whether these AI tools are HIPAA certified, right? Yeah. So, under HIPAA, which is our Health and Information Act, right, for the US, you have to, software technologies have to achieve a certain type of certification in order to have that extremely sensitive information being put into them. And unless it says right at the whatever AI tool you're using, this is HIPAA certified, I also wouldn't put my healthcare data in there. So
that's a really good point. And I think that as teachers, we have to look at how the software is certified for students as well. There are some AI tools that are 13 plus. There are some that are 18 plus. And so making sure that if we are modeling usage for students, we are making sure we're using things that are not going to take their personal information or are protected by FERPA, KIPA, and COPPA. And so making sure that they're following those guidelines is really, really important. Thank you. That's so much to consider. I think another thing that on the kind of positive side is when and what AI is appropriate for usage. What are some things that are really helpful? Do you want to start us off, Fiona, on this one?
Sure. I mean, I have a great use case, and that is I'm in addition to being on the Ethel Walker School Alumni Board, I'm also on the Association of Corporate Counsel in Europe board of directors. And every year we have a conference in Europe. And as part of that, we put together, I don't know, maybe 20 sessions for lawyers. And we usually get a great group of about 10 lawyers. We call them the organizing committee, and they spend 6 to 8 weeks trying to come up with ideas for titles of sessions and, descriptions of sessions that are like 3 or 4 sentences long. And it's a big brain churn, and everybody's doing this on top of their regular job, and it takes a long time. And this year what we decided to do is we had a list already of what general counsels or the head of legal were looking for in different corporations, like whether they wanted to hear about litigation, for example, or updates on litigation. So I spent about an hour putting these topics into ChatGPT, and I just said to ChatGPT, write me a legal conference session that's short and succinct and snappy, less than 4 sentences long or something like that. And in about an hour, I had, 16 different sessions. I went through them, and, it, it did tend to reuse words like navigate and delve into, but once I fixed those and got my thesaurus out to fix them, it was all good. And so we saved, I don't know, maybe 15 hours times 10 lawyers, of time to do that. So it was a great time saver.
That's a great example. Thank you. Leah, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, where there are great examples of it every day. You've already probably been using it without really realizing that that's what's happened. A lot of product recommendations for some of the biggest brands like Amazon they've got all the models in the background going, because you like this, you might also like this. It's a simple use case, but at scale is pretty meaningful. Spotify has their playlists. That is genuinely, it's like they know you. I mean, there's a fine line between what is machine recommended and what starts to be a bit AI powered, but they've got enough data there that is a really fascinating use case to say, like, based on all of the preferences, we serve you your own playlist that's bespoke to you. It's a really lovely example. In our company, the product teams are hard at work. So we, as I said, we have software that's running all the hotel operations. Those are operations that have been very people intensive in the past. And I'm sure you all have read about how difficult the hospitality industry has had. They've had a great difficulty getting people to come back to hospitality after the pandemic. So most restaurants and hotels are operating with much less staff than they had before. So they're looking for every shortcut that they can get in order to be able to have great experiences in restaurants and hotels, with a really tight but well-trained group of people who are being assisted by a lot of technology along the way. And inside my company, we've got some interesting use cases of we're using some AI listening tools in some of our meetings and interviews, not to be stalking, although it is creepy for our candidates when they have the AI over with 4 or 5 other people interviewing them. But the tool is being used to help us figure out, like, what are effective modes of communication? What's our meeting frequencies? How many hours are we spending inside of meetings? That's just giving us all kinds of reports and analytics on internal conversations that are happening times 900 people, times 15 countries, times. And it's going to help us be a lot more efficient with our time. And so that's exciting. So it's pervasive, really.
Thank you. Emily, do you want to jump in too?
Yeah, sure. A lot of the ways that we've been using AI at my last few companies has been about taking the boring and mundane parts of your job out and letting you focus in on the things that you need to use your brain for. Copying and pasting, all these really simple tasks, searching things and putting them into a field it's small little steps like this that are going to save workers time, keep them from being so burned out, and it'll mean the jobs are differently shaped than they were before. And for me, that's one of the exciting possibilities of AI in the workplace. But I also, in terms of generative AI in that aspect individually, we've seen protests and a lot of folks in the acting and writing community talk about how they're worried about their job security, et cetera. There are advantages with the way AI functionally works today. If I said, I want to make a script based on how someone in Gen Z talks, I could reference lots of social media content to get that tone of voice. But because we were talking about what are appropriate uses for AI, I want to caution and leave the ethics of that aside for a second, because that is a big conundrum we could spend the whole hour on. But just talk about the functionality. That's because our language models are pulling from written content environments online, social media, etc., often taking newspapers and books as well. There are lots of lawsuits about that. That's a whole other topic. But what it's not as good at, where AI isn't as appropriate or where the consequences are greater, there's a good NPR story about this where they were saying exactly what I just did about how it could come up with scripts and stories and small descriptions and lighter weight, non-consequential content. But then they had a machine learning algorithm take a stab at rocket launch codes and the mathematical equations needed to launch rockets. And the way the scientists described it is, if you stood far away enough and squinted, sure, it looks like an equation. But when they actually tried to run the numbers, what AI came up with every time ran it into the ground. And so I think that's because it hasn't been trained to the amount that our engines have been trained on, say, social media and places where we're just having casual chit chat. So all that to say, we're going to innovate in spaces where we have the most to learn from and to start with, most likely, where the language models are the most ripe for the picking. But that doesn't mean that every use case is going to be appropriate. There's one more example I'll share from back when I was working in AI at Microsoft, and some people have heard the story before, where folks thought, let's train artificial intelligence based on Twitter conversations. And the idea was that it would, so I saw some folks shaking their head. The idea was that it would be conversational, maybe like a teenager. And it was a good thing they gave it the moniker of a teenager, because what came out was all over the place in terms of wasn't necessarily reliable. I'm not saying this about teenagers per se, but it didn't have the Microsoft branding per se, which was good because it was repeating whatever it heard on Twitter. It was offensive. It quickly became sexist and racist as well. And it was a major failure, but a sign of the environment and the language models within which you train your artificial intelligence have the biggest consequences on what comes out. And so therefore we need to be careful about not just do we have content, but what are we going to get from it? And is it appropriate to run that use case?
And I think, Emily, you brought up something there, which was the whole idea of the large language model, which is, these are the engines or the models. These are the places that we feed, or the companies that are building our AI, they're feeding in a lot of data, right? And they're called large language models. And we're running into problems like with the rocket launch and stuff, is that they're not large number models. So you don't have, what I've heard is that, you can't rely on them for math. Like, actually what happens over time is the math deteriorates. So maybe it will be correct for the first time, but if you keep working, with Gen AI, the idea is that you can interact with the AI and you can narrow the focus. You learn as much how to work with the AI as it's learning by what it's being trained on, right? So it's really fascinating thinking about this stuff down to the details.
It does, though, remind me of like when you first started to work with Google Translate, when it was first launched, it was bad. It was really bad. And actually now it's years later with a lot of contributions and a lot of editing. It's really quite good. And it's just a journey. It's not a destination, as you've said. It's a journey. This is the stepping off point.
That's a really good point, and that leads well to our next kind of consideration or question here. And that's about how we're using AI at Ethel Walker. And I think that I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. I can speak personally that I'm using some AI, again, to do a lot of what you're already talking about, which is to save time. It really helps differentiate Latin text. As a Latin teacher, I have the advantage that there's a lot of Latin already online. So I'm able to have it create tiered readings in Latin Latin, come up with ideas for text in Latin, and always take it with a grain of salt, because as we know, it's not always going to give you things that are actually real. I was doing a Latin passage on Joan of Arc last year, and I asked for sources, and 8 of them were not real last year. But this year, it's a little bit better. I think ChatGPT 3.5 is much better than 3, but still, it has its limitations. And when I'm doing things with students, I want to make sure that if we're doing any sort of kind of fun or playful thing with generative AI, it's something that, like I said, is CAPA, KIPA, or FERPA certified, so that they're not sharing their private information and only using things that are really meant for education. But I think it can save a lot of time. But I think the biggest thing that I come away with is, if students are using it for nefarious purposes, like for academic dishonesty, I think the bigger question isn't, oh, well, why are they using ChatGPT, but rather, why are they relying on academic dishonesty? And I think thinking about how we can support students to believe in the power of their own voice, how we can have students realize that what they're saying matters and they shouldn't be relying on things to speak for them. And even that we want to see their progress over time. We want to have students try and maybe not completely succeed, and give them feedback and the support they need to succeed. And if they're putting things in something like ChatGPT to speak for them, how can we help support them to succeed? So I think by a combination of modeling, talking to students about the importance of their own voice, and if we're going to be using it, showing them how we're using it and being open about that. If I'm using it to differentiate a test, I'm going to tell students about that. But the other part of this is, I would love to hear your feedback. What's some advice you would give to the students of Ethel Walker about AI? I would love to hear your feedback. Do you want to get us started, Leah?
Sure, I will. I mean, it's got to be tempting to use it for primary research. But then, as you and I were talking about before the call, if it's not your opinion, if you haven't used it, if you haven't applied your own critical thinking to whatever is being asked of you, that's the line. I think that's the line where you're stepping into. You use ChatGPT to do your homework, and I think that it's really tough, because I remember the pressure and the deadlines and the workload that we had, and if you could skip some steps, just as we talked about, it's tempting. But I think at the end of the day, what is really being asked of the students is to really form their own opinions and to dig deep into the material and to come back with the digested version, not the ChatGPT version. And I think primary research is absolutely fine, in my opinion, but it is amazing, because it's got to be a conversation, as you said, and it's great just to know that everyone's got an opinion about it, and also that it's not that it's been banned, because that's not how their academic lives are going to be. They're going to be surrounded, so better to be empowered to figure out how to use it than not.
Absolutely. Thank you. Emily?
Yeah, I mean, so my point of view might be a bit different in that I think this is just the next step. We've always looked at our navigation of libraries as a skill set we taught in school. First, it was about navigating an index and then card catalogs. By the time I was in school, we were learning how to type search queries into Alta Vista. And it was almost like a math equation. It was this plus this in quotes or brackets. And I distinctly remember when Google came out and it was just type what you feel. There was a feeling of, oh, students are going to have to work that hard to get their answer. It's just going to be there. They're not going to have to think through any kind of formula to get it. And does that remove barriers? So I see this as just the next evolution of that. I wouldn't be surprised if we find workplace or school place software that essentially can show this argument came from this source, this argument came from this one, and here's the student reasoning between the two and showing their critical thinking, evaluating different potentially AI generated points of views, or really being quite discriminative of where did that source come from, and let me look into that. I would love to see teachers teaching their students to be critical of AI, to build on it and to build with it, because just banning it and saying, oh, it's going to do the work for them, it doesn't solve the problem. They're going to use it, so let's teach them how to use it in a way that still holds on to their unique thoughts, their argument forming, and all the aspects of thinking that I know Walker's likes to emphasize.
I think
great.
that
Thank you, Fiona.
I was just going to build off of what Emily was saying. I think it really challenges us to think about, at least in the school context, your authentic self, and if you were to ask, AI to write a paragraph on a topic, is it your voice or is it somebody else's voice? And it's an opportunity also to use our critical thinking skills. We all have to do that in our jobs. And we have to think about, we're architecting something, we're designing something, we're designing, maybe it's not just writing and drafting something yourself now from scratch. I mean, for example, during the holidays, I wanted to send a really meaningful Christmas card to my manager, and I sort of thought, gosh, I do this every year. I can't think of anything fresh. So I put in, to ChatGPT, what's a good, greeting card that's along these lines. And sure enough, ChatGPT spat something else. I was so relieved that I had something to start with, and then I spent, some time sort of recrafting it. But that's me architecting, using my critical thinking skills, my analytical skills to jive and say, is this my voice or is this somebody else's voice, and making it mine. So I think that's for all of us. It was sort of like, it reminds me of, when Wikipedia came out and everybody was critical of that because it was, the general public just putting their ideas into a one place and being reviewed and edited by other members of the general public. And that's a little bit what I see AI, the large language models, like, we're all putting stuff into it, whether we know or not. And we need to just review it and make sure it seems right to us.
Thank you so much. I think you've all brought up really great points about the skills our students are going to need with AI. I think we have to be critical of AI. We have to also think about the power of writing good prompts and asking good questions. And those are critical thinking skills that we're teaching our students every day anyway. And so I think it goes along with also our thoughts about media bias. Like, we have to look at, is there a bias for generative AI? What is it telling us? What is it not telling us? And so, and also, the power of asking good questions. What makes a prompt good? How do we have to change a prompt to make it give us what we want from it? So there's a lot of really interesting opportunities for learning too. I would love to open it up to questions. If anyone has any questions, anyone who's listening, feel free to either unmute yourself or write any questions in the chat.
We've left everyone in stunned silence.
So no questions yet, but I want to get us started. No, it's good. If you had to come up with, Sarah has a question. Sarah, please ask.
Hi, you probably covered this before, but I am just concerned about being imitated vis-a-vis my finances. I mean, I understand it's very easy to be replicated, and I am concerned about someone getting into my, say, bank account and asking questions. I know that they're all working also on measures to protect me, but I'm just wondering what I can do to recognize something that's not me. And I'm not every moment of every day checking on everything. I'm not paranoid like that, but I'm just concerned long term about how all of us are going to be protected, because these nefarious individuals get more and more clever every day. They're smart people for whatever country they're from, and they're very good at imitating. So do you have it? I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts about that. Thank you.
That feels like a Fiona
I was
question.
going to say, Fiona, do you want to take this one?
I would not have the marketing person answer that.
I was just, I was just going to say, identity fraud or theft is a really serious scenario, and I think that's a great question to bring up. And I think where AI comes into play is it can replicate, images of you. So like facial recognition, I've heard that actually, the facial recognition that we all use on our iPhones is really not very secure. So using things like, and not just relying on your facial recognition, but having like two-factor authentication, where if you have the opportunity to have like your email address and your phone number as well as maybe facial recognition, maybe we can't avoid that, but having multiple ways to verify yourself through every financial registration you have, like bank, social security, anything like that. That's the way to best protect yourself. And I mean, then there's other like just practical advice of, never trust someone who just contacts you out of the blue. Always call the financial institution directly, instead of giving anything away on the phone. Does that help? Yeah. I saw that Mira had a question in the chat. Did everybody see this cognitive liberty? How do we shift our behaviors given the challenges? Especially given that wearable devices using AI can actually tell what we are thinking about and whether we are paying attention.
I joke about the marketing side of this, but I would say that one of the things that's so important is to know which companies you're sharing data with, and that you trust them, you trust these organizations. And it's not just, there will be more regulation and legislation coming through, but it's important that the brands that you share that your personal data with, that you believe that they have strong privacy policies and excellent integrity when it comes to their customer data, or don't share it. It's, you have to be, and this gets back to what you teach students as well, to be really cognitive about where they're getting news from and information, and to really check their sources, and to never just take things at face value, especially if it's coming through on social media or other channels, but to really look, where did this source come from? Who am I sharing data with? And to really be engaged in that, and policing themselves, and not being too free with information on sites. And if you build that into your habit, just as you would in any other context in life, looking across the street before you run across the street, it's just going to be second nature to you after a while. And I think it's these are all the right questions. And I think it's really important that, you just are not sort of blasé about, what brand is contacting you and what they're asking for, but that you're really engaged in it. I think in Europe, and Fiona, you mentioned this, GDPR has really taught everybody that you have a right to your own personal data. And I know California has adopted similar legislation. But increasingly it should be quite universal, that the standards that exist with GDPR, which is that you can, as an individual, go to any company and ask them to delete your personal data, and that they have to by law. And this is the kind of relationship that we need to have with organizations, where it's a give and a take. And if you have not earned the right, and you are reckless with data, then I have the right to go to you and ask you to truly eliminate it. And in that case, you have to eliminate it from all systems, all applications. It has to be proven that that data has been erased. And that's the power that that individuals have when the laws are with you. And I think Europe is a little bit ahead in this context. There's a real understanding that comes from the post-World War II era of knowing that somebody's individual privacy and data is truly their own.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what everyone said so far. I think what I'll add too is just that I think on a case-by-case basis, it's about thinking, is the use case worth it? Is what I'm going to get from sharing this data worth it to me? And there may be times where we might immediately think not sharing data is a good thing, and that's great. But then, for example, you think about when trackers or Fitbits have helped police solve crimes and things like that. So there are moments where, as long as it's in the right hands, it can be beneficial. But it's really about, I think, individuals finding what's valuable and worth it to them.
And I think that the key with all of that is just being, when it comes to your personal sensitive information, is just being vigilant, like you already are. Just be as vigilant as you can, because we don't know, who's fishing for our data. You know, if somebody calls you and says they're from your bank, we don't know any better. We don't have anything in place to double check that or verify. The only thing we can do is hang up, look at the back of our credit or debit card, and call the number on the back of there and see if they have a record of anybody calling us. But don't give any personal information if anybody does contact you that way.
And I see, I think Robin has a question in the chat, but Robin, do you want to ask it out loud?
Sure, especially since I had a typo in there, but can you speak a little more about the databases that are used to train the AI? Because you mentioned a little bit about Twitter and what the results were that came back, and I've heard there's a suit entered by the New York Times, but I wonder what other sources might there be? I'd much prefer the New York Times to Twitter personally, but
I'm happy to start with this one. I'm sure all of us could add something, but essentially, yes, it depends on the use case. So more conversational bots have so far been leveraging those social environments, and OpenAI has, yes, facing a lot of lawsuits. I recently asked founders of a very similar startup, why were they successful and we weren't? And they said, well, we didn't have the deep pockets OpenAI did for the lawsuits. Because when you're going to go take someone's text, and there's lots of books that have been used to inform their language models, then this is part of the fallout. Some people will say, I don't want you learning from what I wrote. I didn't approve of this. So we're going to enter a whole new wave of legal fallout from this in time. But I want to just also note that that's really speaking about the stuff that we all use for fun. When it comes to medical research groups wanting to understand how to spot cancer earlier, it won't be a language model. It'll be a series of hundreds of thousands of radiology scans to understand when there was or wasn't cancer in scans, and that will be the model that it trains off of. So in its most simplest way, you can think of AI usually as sort of being born with a purpose and being trained to do that thing. And sometimes that's understanding how to help with mechanical engineering issues that might come up, and sometimes that's medical cases. And a lot of the stuff that we mostly talk about are conversation, text, writing, and how we speak and communicate to each other.
that's helpful. Thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else feel free to add to?
Well, I just think there was a fascinating example. You guys might have heard of this. There was a podcast at Spotify where they were doing real live translation, real time.
Yeah.
And it was excellent quality. And I think the area of translation is one of the most exciting in terms of what could happen. All of our marketing programs have to go out in at least 8 different languages, and translation, real translation, not just word for word, but really contextual translation, where you're trying to get to the local language, how expressions are used, not just a literal translation, but really expressive. Written language and spoken is incredibly difficult to do with people. It's just genuinely very difficult. And some combination of people and machine could be incredibly powerful. And that's an area that I think could get totally disrupted very quickly, where, there are translators out there and they do moderate to good jobs, and the machines are catching up very, very quickly in that area. And it's one that I think actually is super exciting for being able to communicate quickly, effectively in all different contexts, with international audiences. And that I'm really looking forward to, actually.
Yeah, and I think another area is that we're using at SAP is writing software code. So you could potentially go into a large language model and say, I want to build an application that does XYZ, write me the software code that will do that. And then, that's again a starting off point. It does bring up issues of then who owns the intellectual property. Those are legal issues that have to be considered, because right now they're saying that anything that you generate out of AI doesn't have IP protection. It doesn't have intellectual property protection. It's open source essentially. So it's open, anybody can use it. And so you can't protect it. Like I couldn't say, this is my code, I'm going to sell it, and nobody else can use it.
But how would you teach the engine then? You would just feed it with lots of all of the SAP code or
Lots of code. Yeah, lots of
Salesforce
software.
code or something like that?
Yeah, because code is
Good
comes
code,
in
bad
different
code,
languages.
all
Code is in
code.
languages like C++, C#. It's, so you can, yeah.
Interesting.
Sort of like we're giving.
I didn't realize you trained so specifically for one task. That's really interesting. So thank you.
Look at the
it's-
opposite. Yeah.
It's the example of, I mean, Emily, if I don't know if you agree, but I feel like that Shopify, the Spotify playlist is the one that everybody knows. And it literally, it's all
Right.
about just getting more people to listen.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, don't ask that AI how to where to get groceries, like it'll be specifically. And I was just
Exactly.
gonna make a joke, the way we're explaining this, the way AI is trained is the opposite of a walker's education, right? It's very specific. We're not looking for well-rounded.
Yeah.
And
Although
do
if you
you,
give it
and
the contents of your fridge, it'll give you recipes for it. So it can do stuff like that, which is exciting.
Yeah.
so does each of these flavors have its own name, or is it just an instance of a product, or how would you describe it?
Emily,
That sounds like marketing, Leah. Go for it.
yeah, no, they do. They absolutely do. So each one of the brands, which is solving for a very specific use case. And this is where I think these early use cases are just great. Like if LinkedIn can help you find a better selection of jobs that you're looking for, that's great. And that's going to be the use case that they focus on initially. If TripAdvisor or Booking can use it to create a better, holiday for you, that's great. It's really serving a purpose. So you don't have to spend hours and hours searching for these things, but they will each take their own version and craft it specifically for those use cases.
Yeah, and I think, Leah, I don't know if this is that clear to everybody, but there's really only about 16 different large language models in the world, and take OpenAI is the one we all know and have used, right? ChatGPT, right? So that one, it would be in the back end. So Booking would license that, and then they start adding to that large language model, right? So they start adding all their data, but that doesn't mean that data is then available for another, like Expedia, to come in and use. No, Expedia might also be using OpenAI, but they have to build onto it themselves as well. So it's really interesting how it works.
So as an individual, I'm going to encounter AI through these vendor platforms that I'm probably already familiar with. And I don't have to go to Chat GPT directly to ask my questions, whether it's travel or music or code. I'm going to
Exactly
go through these platforms.
That's
Right.
exactly right, because they're
Thank you.
training, because they're focusing on specific use cases that you're most interested in, and that you've always been going to them for those use
Right.
cases. It's just going to be a more comprehensive search, a better, maybe more personalized, because they're able to connect way more data together and point it specifically at the results. And in our case, our product and tech teams now are working on the same thing for all the hoteliers, and effectively working on a project that's like Alexa for hotels. So that they, if it's everything that you've encountered of why is it that you have to wait for a room when you just landed on an international flight? They know you've landed on an international flight. They could have made that inventory available faster so you don't have to wait till 3 p.m. But
Right.
it's just connecting the data and putting that all in the hands of people who are facing guests. So that's effectively what we know they need.
In my youth, we would call a travel agent who had the contacts to know the hotels or the, whoever, the places that you would like to go, someone your age or your profile, and they had those
Exactly.
personal contacts, and now it's all fed into the AI and they can pull it up easier. This is what you're
Yes.
saying, I think.
Exactly.
Great. That helps me a lot. So Thanks.
It's a thoughtful question.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for participating in this today. And I know, Marion, you wanted to talk about the next session we're going to analyst today.
Yeah. Thank you. I want to reiterate my thanks and just say, I know who enough of you are to say that we have a member of the Board of Trustees, several members of the Alumni Board. We have alums representing every decade, starting with the 1950s until present, on this call, along with students and faculty who had access to this being broadcast during lunch in the common room. And that is, to me, an absolute illustration of the rich, wide and deep Walker's community of lifelong learning. And our goal in putting these forward is to come up with topics that are broadly interesting, where we have really interesting speakers, which is exactly what you've all provided for us today. So thank you, those who spoke. Thank you, those who participated and showed up. And our next Walker's Women in the World is going to be on Monday, March 25th. You will receive an email about it. The topic will be women in sports, and we are just past the 50-year mark for Title IX. We have the Olympics coming up this year. We have a brand new athletics director, Brett Benzio, on campus, who, if you've not spoken to, you need to listen to her. She herself is an internationally competitive athlete, and talks about athletics as it pertains to our high-level athletes, as well as how it pertains to everyone owning their body and their space in the world. So she will be in conversation with two alums, one, Julie Wells, who's an internationally competitive equestrian, and the other, Sydney Satchel, who is a member, by dint of being an amputee, is a member of the U.S. Sitting volleyball team, which is on its way to Paris this summer. So that should be a great conversation to join. And then we also have our book talks with two published authors who published books last year. Wednesday, February 21st, in conversation with Class of 87, Nigar Alam. She will be interviewed by Class of 83, Andrea Abbott, who is the director of book publishing and culture for Condé Nast. And then in April, we're going to have Wendy Walker, Class of 85, with her new novel. So we are trying to provide these because we hope you will continue to be interested in coming together in this way. So the last thing I would say, because I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't, is to say it's always the right time to participate in the conversation, and it's always the right time to participate in supporting what's going on at Walker's today. So feel free to make a gift to the annual fund whenever you feel so moved, and we would be greatly appreciative. So thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Everybody, good to see you.
I'll
Thanks,
see you
Mary.
Friday, Robin. See you Friday.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye, all. Thanks for being here.